Number 5. Dagon and the Deep Ones. Coming up first on our list is a multifaceted entry with Dagon and the Deep Ones who worship him. They kinda go together. What is a Deep One? It's not a sea monster that went to first year philosophy and is always trying to wax poetic, but rather a Deep One refers to a race of amphibious, humanoid-like-ish sea creatures, closely resembling creatures like frogs or axolotls. If you've ever seen Hellboy's Abe Sapien or the monster from Shape of Water, those monsters are actually a pretty good representation for what a Deep One should look like. Deep Ones get their name from their homes, deep beneath the sea, obviously, where they live out their cold, often miserable lives. When Deep Ones do venture to the surface, they do so to sweep humans under their influence, promising them riches in exchange for worship, sometimes even mating with them, creating disgusting hybrid Deep Ones. And first and foremost, to ingratiate them into the cult of Dagon, worshipping their master, Dagon, a massive Deep One of fantastic power. Dagon appears in the short story appropriately named Dagon, which is also a great jumping on point if you've ever been curious about reading H.P. Lovecraft and you didn't know where to start. It's one of the first appearances of any of the Lovecraft monsters at all. Dagon is worshipped by humans and Deep Ones in equal measure, no doubt thanks to his influence. Dagon is immortal, massive, and commands a lot of respect. It's unknown what the full extent of Dagon's power is, but given that he's an immortal sea monster with dominion over a race of pelagic nightmares that do his every bidding, let's assume that if he really wanted to stir up trouble, it would not be that difficult for him. Just ask the town of Innsmouth how they feel about their master. They've got nothing but positive things to say, I'm sure. And hey, while I got you here, if you're liking what we do, we'd always appreciate a subscribe our way, and you'll catch the best horror videos in your inbox every single day. Number 4, the Shoggoths. A Shoggoth or a Shoggoth, I'm really not sure, which does sound a bit like something a 1920s chimney sweep might yell at you to get off. Hey, Shoggoth! Is a disgusting, writhing mess of iridescent black slime and a sea of eyeballs engineered by the Elder Things to function as a race of tools for their will, as they're mostly used for undersea construction. They're amorphous, shape-shifting monstrosities, able to mock and reflect all matter of organ and life. A Shoggoth is capable of molding itself however it needs to see fit to accomplish its dark dealings, which make them the perfect tools for the Elder Things. Now, the first generation of Shoggoths were brainless husks, solely driven to appease their masters. But over the eons of their existence, the Shoggoths began to mutate and develop a low form of consciousness, eventually rising up and overthrowing the Elder Things altogether and working for themselves to build their own cities, where they now reside in their city in Antarctica, poorly imitating their old masters, shrieking "Tikali, Tikali" over and over, an old rallying cry the Elder Things would shout at the Shoggoths to get them to work. Poor little amorphous shape-shifting monstrosities. Now, although a Shoggoth was intended to serve mostly as a being for construction, they're not without their abilities. A Shoggoth is hulkingly strong, capable of crushing a human in seconds, and they're known for using their brute strength to solve problems in their way. For example, the Shoggoth that makes an appearance in the Mountains of Madness crushes an entire rookery of penguins that was in its way beneath its mighty weight. While the Shoggoths don't seem to have any higher goals or aspirations, they've shown themselves to be threatening enough that if crossed, you'll regret ever dismissing them as nothing more than tools.
Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-1682. Sunworms! Hell yeah, I feel like that's good enough of a description. I don't need to say anything else, just sunworms. Okay, I guess I should explain the whole thing. See, these are large, segmented, worm-like entities that exist in the sun. The good folks over at the Foundation have estimated that the one that we've designated 1682 is over 28,000 kilometers long. It appears to dive and loop for long periods of time, often roaming the surface of the photosphere for 3 to 4 months before diving down and disappearing for 4 to 8 months. The people investigating it believed it to be a permanent fixture at that point, but one day it up and fired its way across the galaxy. It emerged from the photosphere at a speed of 1045.5 kilometers per second and was last sighted passing Pluto. Now, get this. Some folks are calling it a solar tapeworm. That's right, it lives in the bowels of the sun until it's sapped enough energy and then heads off on its merry way. It's an image I didn't need. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-2859. This one literally mirrors an entire quadrant of the solar system, so if that's not big, I don't know what to tell you. Try not to feel too dwarfed in its shadow, you know, we're all tiny specks of insignificant nothing if you really think about it. So isn't that a little bit comforting? No? Not to you? Okay, well, on with the explanation anyway. It will manifest in enclosed, unused space, eventually breaching the object encapsulating it. Expeditions inside have shown that celestial objects do indeed exist within it in the precise locations that they would be otherwise. It also tends to pull anything that makes contact with its threshold in. Otherwise, it doesn't really affect the area around it, it just kind of is there. It's weird and potentially micro-radiation inducing, but not terrible in of itself. But there is a giant species of giant serpentine predators around 80,000 kilometers in length that do seem to follow this anomaly wherever it goes. And anything that it pulls in, they will consume. So that's not good. Instances of 2859 have been spotted dangerously close to Earth too, so you better keep an eye out. And finally at number 1 we've got SCP-3200. Get this, we've made some claims about enormous stuff in this video, but this SCP is literally light years in diameter. 300 million light years to be precise. That is a big anomaly. It's expanding by about 1 million light years per year too. This void could potentially collapse the universe. That's how huge it is. If it were 2009, it would be a great source for run-ups to Yo Mama jokes. However, because we've moved past that as a society, I'll avoid stooping that low. Suffice it to say, this is one gigantic SCP. The exact properties of this thing are currently unknown too. It was discovered by civilian scientists, and the folks who investigated it most closely ran into some issues. The Peregrine expedition took some experimental tech and ran with it, hoping to find something useful within the SCP-3200 void. Taking advantage of temporal sinks, the crew was able to travel into the heart of the anomaly in a relatively short period of time. They arrived in the void and saw nothing but blackness. No stars, no galaxies, true void action. Eventually, a box showed up, surprising the crew. Inside was a CD containing a video of the captain talking to camera. He claimed they'd been trying to slow the anomaly's growth to little success, which disturbed the crew. Over time, reality began to act different, and even more different than they expected going in. They also managed to amass quite the collection of footage of the captain speaking about the anomaly. None of these elaborated on what the anomaly was actually doing though. Eventually, tragically, they got to the source of the matter. After witnessing thousands of different iterations of himself investigate the void over a period of what could be thousands of years, it became clear to the captain that space-time was torn and had been rending itself apart. The things they've seen are echoes of different timelines, produced, consumed, and repurposed by the Abyss. There's no way to fix it, although each iteration of the crew does their best. It's growing larger, consuming more, and yet there is nothing we can do about it. In the last words of Captain Kuznetsov, we've seen into the abyss, and by God, it hates us.
Coming in at number 5, Cyclops. I mean, we can't have a giant creature list without including one of the most infamous giants in history, Cyclops. Hailing from Greek mythology and then later Roman mythology, the Cyclops were giant one-eyed creatures who can be distinguished in 3 groups. In Hesiod's theogony, they're the brothers Brontes, Steropus, and Argus, I think, who provided Zeus with his weapon, the Thunderbolt. In Homer's Odyssey, they are an uncivilized group of shepherds, the brethren of Polyphemus encountered by Odysseus. Cyclopses were also famous as the builders of the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae and Tyrannus. For the sake of avoiding confusion, let's focus our attention to the Homeric Cyclopses. In an episode of Homer's Odyssey, the hero Odysseus encounters the Cyclops Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon, a one-eyed man-eating giant who lives with his fellow Cyclopses in a distant land. They live in the world of men rather than among the gods. Homeric Cyclopses are presented as uncivilized shepherds, savages, and have no regard for Zeus. They live solitary lives and have no government. They're said to be inhospitable to strangers, slaughtering and eating all who come to their land. Coming in at number 4, Corb, or the Fomorians. The Fomorians are a supernatural race in Irish mythology, often portrayed as hostile and monstrous beings who come from under the sea or the earth. However, later they were portrayed as giants and sea raiders and enemies of Ireland's first settlers. They appear to have once been gods who represent the harmful or destructive powers of nature, personifications of chaos, darkness, death, blight, and drought. In Old and Middle Irish, the race is typically called the Fomor or Fomori, with an individual member being called a Fomor. They are often regarded as malevolent spirits dwelling underwater and in the nether regions of the earth, before later being portrayed as the aforementioned Sea Raiders. This was heavily influenced by the Viking raids on Ireland that were taking place during this time. Oftentimes they were depicted as having the body of a man and the head of a goat, and according to an 11th century book, they are said to have one eye, one arm, and one leg.
Coming in at number 3, we've got Kroll. Alright, we're 3 for 3 here, not exactly hitting the horror nail on the head. But giant monsters are scary all on their own. Whether or not they're featured in true horror movies doesn't matter. Now that I've done my mental gymnastics, let's talk about this gargantuan Doctor Who beast. Ages ago, giant squid were brought to Delta 3, a moon orbiting Delta Magna. Usually it's a bad idea to introduce brand new species to an unprepared ecosystem, and this proves to be true once again when Kroll eats a swampy priest along with a holy relic. After this unfortunate meal, Kroll begins to mutate in unexpected ways. The biggest change of all was definitely his size. Kroll was suddenly a mile wide and hundreds of meters tall. He promptly became the god of Delta 3, living under the mud, munching on whatever he get his tentacles around. The swampies that inhabited the moon began to worship Kroll and saw him as a religious deity. Now they even call the times he surfaces manifestations. I mean, it makes sense. If you were a primitive species of green people living on a moon and a mile-wide squid kept showing up, you'd probably think it was a higher power too. A mile wide. They also rely on the beast to kill their enemies, which he is very capable of doing. Well, until the good doctor rolls up. But hey, not even the biggest of big monsters can stand up to a Time Lord. Coming in at number 2, we've got King Ghidorah. Oh, baby. See, I could have populated this entire list with entries from the Godzilla verse, but then it would just become a Godzilla list. I guess Godzilla Earth could have made the cut too, which would be fun, but it's just not on the agenda today. So I went through all of the iconic beasts and monsters that have at some point fought or teamed up or existed at the same time as Godzilla and tried to find the biggest one. Godzilla itself was up for consideration, but if you've ever seen these two square off, you'll know who the larger lad is. Sporting 3 heads and a wingspan that can block out the sun, King Ghidorah is a massive monster. It makes plenty of appearances across all sorts of movies, but we'll focus on his appearance in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, which, you know, come on. Well, this Hydra-like being stands at 150 meters tall and has a wingspan of 175. If you want big, you've got it. And those wings better be big too, as he weighs over 70,000 tons. It's a miracle it can get off the ground at all. But once it's up there, can reach Mach 3. Many Godzilla monsters end up teaming up with the titular icon from time to time, but never King Ghidorah. The two are diametrically opposed, arch rivals, never to see eye to eye on anything, and I can respect that long-standing beef. Between these two, it's on sight. He's a force of pure evil, meant to destroy anything and everything it can. There's no good lurking within, no greater purpose beyond destruction, and he's really good at destruction. Ghidorah can fire gravity beams and destroy city blocks in an instant. He can generate lightning with his wings. He can suck the life force out of anyone foolish to get close. So size isn't the only terrifying thing about this monster. He's got an RPG protagonist's toolbox worth of powers too. And coming in at number 1, we've got Clover. The main monster from Cloverfield. Clover is pretty big, right? Can rampage through New York, toss the Statue of Liberty, and generally cause a lot of trouble. But get this, the towering entity that peers down at the camera in the film's penultimate scene isn't even fully grown. It's just a baby. No wonder it was so cranky. But for real, Clover can get way, way bigger. In the Cloverfield paradox, we get an up-close look at the full-grown abomination. As an escape capsule heads back to Earth, a welcome party is organized, and by welcome party I mean giant monster, and by organized I mean he sticks his head through the clouds. They're cumulus clouds too, so the monster is poking his head through cloud cover at around 1,000 meters above ground level. And the pod is landing over water, meaning that the monster is likely partially submerged too. The average depth of the ocean is a few kilometers deep, and we can't prove that the monster is standing anywhere particularly deep, but I'll let you draw your own conclusions there. We know that the baby is around 100 meters tall, and we know that the adult is poking its head through the clouds above the ocean, so you tell me how tall you think it really is. It definitely dwarfs anything else we've discussed so far. Sheesh. So, does anyone have some sort of inferiority complex now? Are you terrified of getting stomped by one of these and them not even noticing? The world of monsters is pretty crazy, and the bigger they are, the more existential dread they instill.
Kicking off at number 5, Destroy All Monsters, 1968. Alright, probably the best place to start if you're not sure what kaiju cinema is by ramming together pretty much every single kaiju ever and making them throw down in a titanic battle to the death. And I mean, it's probably important to note that this movie features perhaps the most kaiju in any giant monster movie ever. We're talking Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan, King Ghidorah, Anguirus, Manila. It goes without saying, but they're pretty big players, and obviously anytime Godzilla, Mothra and Rodan get together, you know that some pretty big stuff is going to go down. Directed by Ishiro Honda, one of the biggest players in the Showa era of kaiju cinema and one of Toho Studios' best and brightest assets, Destroy All Monsters takes place in a time of pure utopia where world peace has been achieved by the year 1999, and all of the giant monsters that have previously tried to destroy the planet have instead been captured and confined to an area known as Monsterland. However, just when all seems well, all of these monsters are broken out of their metaphorical giant prison and instead mind-controlled by an alien species known as the Kilax, who then send the kaiju to attack major cities across the planet. We're talking Godzilla tearing apart New York City, Rodan invading Moscow, and Mothra and her larval offspring laying waste to the cities of Beijing. Thankfully, Earth's defenses, spearheaded by the United Nations Science Committee in their first appearance, eventually wrestle back control of the poor mind-control kaiju. But that's when the Kilax send their biggest and baddest nasty of all time, King Ghidorah himself, and then stuff really gets blown to smithereens. The thing is, although not quite campy enough to be mid-70s kaiju brilliance, and not quite gritty enough to be mid-80s and 90s kaiju raw action, Destroy All Monsters sits somewhere between the two, and yet, most importantly, it's just pure fun. Destroy All Monsters is insane, and it's a time where Toho Studios figured, what the heck, we've got all of these monsters, we may as well put them through their paces. Although not a highlight of kaiju history in any way, it sets the precedent for many more to come. Swinging in at number 4, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, 2001. And if you're looking for a real mouthful, then why don't you try Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Yeah, because who cares about film titles anymore, right? Thankfully for us though, although colloquially dubbed GMK by kaiju monster movie fans, 2001's Giant Monsters All Out Attack is perhaps one of the most accessible kaiju movies ever made. The thing is, whilst it certainly embraces the unabashed cheesiness that earlier Showa era and Heisei era kaiju movies were so famed for, this one was made during the short period known as the Millennium era. And strangely enough, much like the zeitgeist captured in that period of cinema, GMK is surprisingly dark. For a kaiju movie, it's gritty as all hell, and although not perfect in any sense, there are moments in this movie that really turn the franchise on its head. And to address the kaiju elephant in the room, yes, Giant Monsters All Out Attack is hated by certain portions of the fanbase, given the fact that King Ghidorah, the ultimate adversary of all time, is instead the good guy in this story. And that means only one thing: our beloved Godzilla is the villain. Written and directed by Shusuke Kaneko, GMK features Godzilla as a ravenous returning force during a time where the world and the brave and noble JSDF are nervous about where and when Godzilla will strike again. Unbeknownst to them though, Godzilla is actually possessed by the souls of the dead that were lost during the events of World War II. And then the only thing left to do is for an unlikely alliance to be forged between Mothra, King Ghidorah and Dagon. Although the themes aren't always clear in this movie, and although they miss more often than they hit, GMK is one of the most complete giant monster movies of recent times. Although the unconventional Godzilla is kind of a hated theme, start to finish, GMK is entertaining, and that's the most important thing.
Coming in at number 3, we've got the creature from After Midnight / Something Else. For fans of Spring and other assorted horror rom-coms, this movie manages to be scary, heartfelt, and weirdly life-affirming all at the same time. After the main character Hank wakes up one day to discover his longtime girlfriend is missing, things start going south. He loses his lust for life and tends to just mope around. However, this mopey attitude can't stick around forever, as every night a monster lays siege upon their home in the middle of nowhere. When this happens, Hank is forced to take action, brandishing a gun and attempting to keep the creature at bay. The thing is, these monster attacks are nowhere near as distressing to Hank as his girlfriend just up and leaving one day. So he's got both of these issues to wrestle with, and maybe the monster is a metaphor for something, but I'll let you figure that one out for yourself. If a rarely seen nightcrawler with a penchant for causing noise and then disappearing doesn't sound exactly like a monster you'd be thrilled by, at least make it past the halfway point of this movie. There's a long take sequence that is absolutely mind-blowing, and it elevates pretty much every other element in the movie. And just in case you're wondering, the flick is commonly known as After Midnight, but you can probably find it under the title Something Else as well. Coming in at number 2, Sam from Trick or Treat. If any horror mascot deserves more praise than they're currently getting, it is this delightful little pumpkinhead from the Ultimate Halloween Horror Anthology. Just look at him. He simply oozes Halloween spirit. The thread that runs through all the fantastic late October tales, Sam is ruthless, deadly, and honestly, not that hard to cheer for. Even though he has a penchant for slasher villain violence, his goals are understandable. He's gotta ensure that everyone's following the rules of Halloween. Extinguish your pumpkin too early? Good luck. Hoard all your candy. Ouch. Act in ways that fly in the face of a good spooky time? Well, I hope you have all of your affairs handled. Wielding a razor-sharp lollipop and enough strength for 10 dudes his size, Sam is a man on a mission. Or a weird Halloween spirit on a mission. By all means, Sam should have a plethora of horror movies featuring his antics. Trick or Treat is a veritable cult hit, begging for sequels and spin-offs and animated series and more. But for whatever reason, we haven't seen much more of him since his 2007 debut. Maybe someday, right? And finally, at number 1, we've got Lola from Cam. As technology continues to play bigger and bigger roles in our lives, this digital doppelganger gets even scarier. It presents viewers with so many questions. To what degree is my online persona the same as me? How different is it from me? Could it be a totally different person? How does the perception of that from other people change who I am? What if my online image takes a wicked turn, and how can I prove who is the real me? Now that we've been largely existing in digital spaces over the past year and a bit, these questions hit a little harder. Cam is the tale of a cam girl named Alice, who through plenty of hard work and creative, morbid cam shows has amassed quite a following. In order to keep her work life and home life separate, she creates an alter ego to perform as Lola. But as she hits a major milestone, she loses control of her account. However, someone is still running her streams. Someone who looks, sounds, and for the most part acts exactly like her. But this avatar is all Lola and no Alice. This version of Lola ramps up the stakes during her streams, performing acts that should kill her, but always manages to survive. As Alice investigates, she discovers that similar things have happened to other online performers, resulting in their eventual violent deaths. So she's gotta figure out how this alter ego came to life and how to stop it before it's too late. If the implications of digital existence have ever concerned you, this is a monster that will haunt your nightmares for ages. More monsters is always a good thing, right? Well, if you don't agree, I'm sure one will find you soon.
Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-1548. Quick, name some enormous things. Elephants, office buildings, Mount Everest. Well, these are all good guesses. Yeah, they're big, but here's the deal. Pretty much everything on this list is going to dwarf something you could conceivably behold on Earth. Yeah, it's gonna be one of those. 1548 is known as the Hateful Star. Stars, as you might already know, are huge. Like our sun is one of the smaller varieties going around. Try to wrap your head around that for a moment. In fact, this star is more than just a star, it's multiple solar phenomena. There's SCP-1548-1, which is a series of sunspots, each 40,000 by 15,000 kilometers in size. About 23 hours after they appear, they converge, becoming one enormous solar prominence, taking the shape of thaumaturgic symbols. Then there are 1548-2 and 3, which are sunspots and symbols that form under different circumstances, but are usually pretty huge too. These occurrences cause a whole lot of insane stuff to happen, from inflicting intense psychological damage on people who behold them, to strengthening materials, to causing weapons affected by the symbol to annihilate stuff around their areas of effect. In fact, a recent event has caused irreversible changes to our solar system. A rapid recurrence of 1548-1 events has led to a dense cloud of ionizing radiation to form around our solar system, totally changing the night sky. The Foundation has started to disseminate information to keep the public calm, but the effects of this change in the sky have started to be noticed. Folks who witness certain things in the night sky have had their minds altered by the malice 1548 seems to emit, and powerful weapons have leveled large areas. There's something in there about a subset of folks known as Orthothans who seem to be waging some kind of war. The O5 Council has been voting on what to do for a while now, but I'm not exactly sure what's gonna happen next, so wish you the best of luck. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-3125. Now, if you want to read this one, you've got to know the code to get in. That's right, it's locked behind a keypad, and only those with a secret password are getting in. How do I know the password? Well, I'm special. You're not, but I'll give you a hint anyway. How many flavors in a standard roll of Lifesavers? How many guys at the burger joint that fries their fries in peanut oil? What's 7 minus 2? What's the smallest dollar bill in Canada? A number that rhymes with alive.
Use that as you will. I've got plausible deniability if you guys break into the number pad without being allowed to be there. Enter at your own risk. This SCP is quite a mind boink, described as an extremely large, highly aggressive, metastasized meme complex. It started outside our reality and now it's right up in it. I always knew the rising popularity of memes would be the death of us all. It's adapted for survival in much harsher conditions than we can provide, and therefore humans don't really have any sort of defense against 3125. When someone's affected by it, they become incapable of entertaining weaker ideas. Their whole being is then devoted to the propagation of 3125. So this thing can spread fast through the ideas of our weaker minds. And just like propaganda, you're not immune to it. Nope, not even you. No, you're not special. As of right now, it's not entirely present in our reality. If it ever managed to manifest completely, the knowledge of it would spread throughout the world very quickly, likely ending anybody's ability to do anything about it in less than 12 hours. Even now, folks who learn about it end up dead very quickly. The worst part is, most folks who are infected, and therefore are infectious, don't really know it, or they can't conceive of knowing it. Once 3125 makes its way into someone's mind, they forget about it and they don't even notice it. It uses some sort of brain altering thing to make sure that nobody's aware of it. The way the Foundation describes it is like the stuff mosquitoes use to prevent you from noticing that they're sucking your blood. But instead of your blood, they're like taking over your brain, and it's not itchy, it's just gonna kill you. Right now, there's no real way to fight it. A scientist suggested creating an irreality amplifier, but that would require the folks building it to understand what they were building, and then they would have to know about the meme, and then they'd get infected by it. So let's just hope that the Foundation keeps it in check indefinitely, because if this gigantic mass of memetic information makes its way into our reality, we're toast.
Next up at number 3, Monsters 2010. Okay, here we have a pretty difficult one. On the one tentacle, Monsters feature some of the most remarkable special effects that I've ever seen from a debut feature filmmaker. On the other tentacle, 2010's Monsters is difficult to access. This movie has a very peculiar pacing that makes it difficult to truly get behind, and on first viewing of this movie, I was left a little underwhelmed. However, when you watch this movie back, the craftsmanship behind it is astonishing. For a film that promises on delivering a certain set of expectations, it certainly does that and then completely subverts them. Hey, maybe you'll be blown away by this movie like quite a number of people are and were, but all I'm saying is, if it doesn't stick, give it another chance. Also, the guy who made this movie, Gareth Edwards, well, I went to the same college as he did, and I grew up in the same town, so yeah. Please don't think I'm being biased. And also, just saying, but Gareth Edwards is awesome, and both 2014's Godzilla and Star Wars Rogue One were remarkable efforts. Monsters tells a tale of a NASA deep space probe that, after crash landing in the wilderness of Mexico, sprouts extraterrestrial life forms that rapidly spread throughout the Mexico-US border region, subsequently leading to the quarantine of the northern half of Mexico. Quickly, both the US and Mexican troops frantically battle to contain these creatures, and so a huge wall stretches the entirety of the border and is quickly assembled. Sound familiar? Yeah, this movie is geopolitical and it pulls no punches in that regard. It's also prophetic, maybe, which is pretty weird to say, but whatever. It stars Scoot McNairy, who is awesome, by the way, as an American photojournalist tasked with finding his boss's daughter, played by Whitney Able, who is stranded in a Mexican hospital in the heartlands of the Ravaged Zone. And that's all I'll say, really, because this movie is a road movie without any roads, just giant tentacular creatures roaming the wasteland. Also, it's important to note that this movie isn't exactly scary, but instead it offers a far more refreshing angle to the giant monster genre, and that alone is worth taking a look at. Coming in at number 2, The Relic, 1997. Pretty unfortunate timing that, isn't it? This movie, like many others, makes SWAT teams look incredibly inefficient. Sorry SWAT, but it's a pretty glaring trope that I just had to point out. If you see a SWAT team, you know things are gonna get, well, pretty bad. Now, if you guys didn't know, I absolutely love this weird little 90s oddball of a movie, and so it only feels appropriate that somewhere down the line we just have to give it a place on our giant monster movies list. Cthulhu certainly stands the test of time in that regard, and although flawed in many ways, the amount of unabashed 90s brilliance that is poured into this movie is truly a feat to be witnessed. This movie is just fun, and if we're in the mood for being comparative, 1997's The Relic is the deep impact of the movie monster world, and whilst we all know that Deep Impact is far superior to Armageddon, in that regard The Relic is kind of unrivaled. spectacle too. And not only is it unrivaled, it's just fun. This movie is so damn entertaining that you should give it a watch just for that sake. Directed by Peter Hyams and based upon the 1995 novel of the same name by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, The Relic tells the tale of Dr. Margot Green, played by the awesome Penelope Ann Miller, an evolutionary biologist who is stationed at the Field Museum of Natural History in downtown Chicago. Here, during her application for a brand new research grant, she stumbles upon the unearthed research of a missing anthropologist, Dr. John Whitney, who has seemingly disappeared after studying the cultural practices of a tribe in the jungles of South America. Now, part of this research is a strange stone statue that depicts a creature known only as the Cthogha, a mythical monster that rules the forgotten jungles of South America. And then, of course, suddenly and out of nowhere, people just start losing their heads and their brains willy-nilly in all manners of crazy, mysterious, museum-based monstrosities. If you enjoy ominous camera work around dark corridors, and if you enjoy the premise of loosely based anthropology in one of the most underrated and entertaining movies of the 90s with some remarkable performances to boot, giant monster included, then this movie is certainly for you. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, The Ritual, 2017. Alright then guys, let's pull no punches. If it's scary that you came for, then scary is what you're going to get. Truth be told, as has been highlighted in both parts of this series, when it comes to actual giant monsters in horror cinema, it's relatively difficult to efficiently deliver the spooks. It's like a sliding scale, really, and the larger these creatures become, then the more that the technicalities of horror cinema become diminished. It's difficult to balance, and perhaps the reason that many of these monster movies have instead relied on the tried and tested trope of creating the most convincingly large creature imaginable, 2017's The Ritual, however, is perhaps the finest balance of the two, and although we have already covered it in a creature feature regard, it is only proper that we give it its place here too. Mainly for the fact that, well, the Jotun is pretty damn large, and terrifying, and weird. But yeah, that's just what we've come to expect when it comes to the mythological monstrosities of the ancient Norse. That goes without saying. Directed by David Bruckner with a screenplay by Joe Barton, 2017's The Ritual is based upon the 2011 novel of the same name by Adam Neville, which is surprisingly brilliant. The film itself stars Rafe Spall, Arsha Ali, Robert James Collier, and Sam Troughton, who all offer some freaking fantastic performances in this movie, and play Luke, Phil, Hutch, and Dom respectively, 4 best friends who agree to hike the Kungslätten forest in Sarek National Park, northern Sweden, following the tragic death of their longtime friend Rob, who wished to hike the trail before he was murdered in an effort to bring their struggling friendship back together. Spoilers, kind of. And really, that's kind of all there is to The Ritual, without giving any other spoilers away, because it's 4 best friends trapped in a terrifying forest as a giant monster and its fanatical death cult roam the woodland ready to ruin everyone's day. And yet, although the brilliance of this movie relies on some well-constructed interlocking narratives, ultimately resulting in a more than cathartic ending, the best part of 2017's The Ritual is the creature design alone. Seriously, the less we say about the Jotun, the better, but this film features one of the most unique monster designs of recent times, and whilst not as big as Godzilla or King Kong, as so far as originality in horror cinema goes, this giant, terrifying demigod is certainly worth the zealotry. Give it a watch.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Slattern. Pacific Rim is just such a wicked kaiju movie, eh? I mean, technically I don't know many people who would classify it as horror, but the smattering of enormous entities is enough to get any monster fan excited. Throughout the flick, it manages to one-up each monster with a bigger, badder beastie. Even the first one could be the main event in a lesser movie, but Guillermo del Toro does not let up. After fighting their way through all the categories of kaiju, the folks from the Jaeger Foundation have one final challenge, the first ever Category 5. Slattern. This thing is wicked. Over 180 meters tall and weighing in at nearly 7,000 tons, it is a force to be reckoned with. It blows all the other kaiju out of the water, which is kind of funny when you think about it because of that nuclear payload that gets detonated moments after it shows up. You know, because all the water is blown away for a moment. Okay, focus. Slattern isn't just huge, it's dangerous. It has 3 insane tails that can pierce armor and whip around at Mach speed. It has a freaky hammerhead that can be used to slam people to smithereens, and it's so toxic and nuclear that its insides are glowing blue. Wow. And the crowning jewel of all sorts of kaiju fits in well here too. It's pretty much immune to any and all attacks. Like, humanity had to develop Jaegers in order to even have a chance against these beasts, and as the first Category 5 to make it through the breach, Slattern is extremely resilient. It takes a long fight, a nuclear explosion, and a nuclear turbine blast point blank to the chest to take it down. That is one heck of a movie monster. Coming in at number 4, we've got sandworms. We've talked about graboids and ass blasters a few times in this channel, but I can't recall any time where I discussed Dune. That ends today. with an acknowledgement of one of the most iconic monsters of all time. Oh man, this might not be horror proper either, it's more sci-fi, but oh well. Sandworms are absolutely bonkers. An average specimen can grow to be over 450 meters long, which is half a kilometer. And those are just the observed ones. It's thought that some worms that live in these southern pole areas can grow up to 1,000 meters, although it's never been confirmed. Still, the fact that worms of that size is even possible is nuts, and that is just the length. Sure, it's crazy that they're that long, but their maws are incomprehensibly large too. Some of the gaping mouth holes can be 120 or even 240 meters across. They could swallow entire buildings, no chewing required. Just absolutely enormous, these ones. They're so big, people on the planet Arrakis use them as their distance measuring units. How long will it take to get there? About 5 sandworms. The way their bodies work is pretty nuts too. See, their insides resemble something like a furnace and generate heat and flames. Imagine being a living being who heats up to the point of producing fire. Life is pain, I suppose. Although their tough skin and scales are up to the challenge. These outer pieces of armor are so tough they're basically impenetrable, although if you know what you're doing, the scales can be used to ride the worms, which is pretty cool.
Next up at number 3, Cloverfield, 2008. You know what, guys? I've said it before and I will say it again. Cloverfield doesn't get the credit that it deserves. And as far as giant monster movies go that actually do justice to the science fiction horror genre as a whole, then Cloverfield is perhaps one of the closest and most recent depictions of just exactly that. Cloverfield is awesome, and also as a side note, if the whisperings are to be believed, we'll be getting a hopefully worthy sequel to this movie sooner rather than later, which is reason enough to be excited really. The thing is, we spoke in the intro about kaiju movies and how they are the quintessential example of giant monster movies, but as we also mentioned, they also aren't exactly scary. Cloverfield, in my opinion, is the remedy to that, and in turn, it was inspired by the reverence that the author J.J. Abrams has as a filmmaker for Godzilla and all of his friends. His intention was to give life to the Western version of the kaiju genre, and he did exactly that, whilst also staying true to the promise of horror. For those of you that haven't yet seen it or brushed it off as another Hollywood cash grab, please give it a chance, it's awesome. Written by Drew Goddard, the man behind the brilliant Netflix Daredevil series, and directed by Matt Reeves, the man behind the Planet of the Apes series, Cloverfield of course was put together by J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot Studios with the intention of breathing life to giant monster movies for a Western audience. Shot from a found footage perspective, it tells the tale of a man named Rob Hawkins and his then girlfriend Beth, who whilst during a party in downtown New York City find themselves in the midst of a giant monster attack in which the city itself is torn asunder by a terrifying unknown alien lifeform. You see, the original Godzilla movies have analytically been related to the devastating World War II atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a metaphorical cultural expression of the tragedy that unfolded. Subsequently, in many ways, Cloverfield has been tied to New York City's own tragic destructive event with the 9/11 attacks. For that reason, and that reason alone, I think Cloverfield deserves its place as a cultural titan of sci-fi and horror. It truly does. Coming in at number 2, The Host, 2006. Alright guys, this is where things get difficult, because in many ways, 2006 The Host is perhaps one of the finest monster movies ever made. Period. This movie truly is remarkable, and whilst we've covered it on several occasions in our Korean horror movies list, in relation to monster movies, we really can't let it slip on by like an amphibious radioactive sea creature slipping beneath a sewer. The thing is though, where it becomes difficult is that like several movies on this list, The Host is a genre mashup of sorts. This is a movie about family and loss and grief, and also a bizarre mixture of action and black comedy that is actually hilarious in parts, in places that it really shouldn't be. I mean, it's a result of South Korean filmmaking as a whole being incredibly transcendent with genre, playing with themes and tropes that Western directors wouldn't otherwise do, and yet truth be told, the results are startling. It makes for a movie the likes of which can't be replicated, and that alone is reason enough to see it. Also, please don't get this movie confused with the 2013 movie The Host, because, yeah. No thank you. Written and directed by Bong Joon-ho, the awesome South Korean director and man behind Snowpiercer, which you should also take a look at if you haven't, the host tells the tale of Park Gang-do, a slow-witted guy who runs a snack bar on the banks of the Hum River, who witnesses his daughter Hyun-so get kidnapped by a gigantic, grossly mutated amphibious creature that was created by a secretive chemical spill and subsequent cover-up by US authorities, which then subsequently sends the city of Seoul into complete and utter mayhem, as you may imagine, really. Obviously, spoilers are abound from here on in, so we'll leave it at that, but really, the host does something incredibly impressive with the giant monster genre. It's terrifying, it's hilarious in places, and most importantly, this giant monster movie actually has heart. Maybe even like 3 hearts, actually. Probably. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Troll Hunter, 2010. Alright guys, you wanted giant monster movies, you got it. Now, I've certainly ummed and ahed about it, and after lengthy deliberation, I'm fairly certain that this movie delivers everything we've ever wanted when it comes to being awestruck by a species of creature that domineers our very human-sized landscape. Troll Hunter is exactly that. It's smart, it's well executed, and most importantly, this film is gigantic in scale. The thing is, I think quite a lot of people brush this movie off as too ridiculous to ever have been worthwhile, and whilst you may be thinking that the notion of trolls are an overbaked concept in folklore, never mind in horror cinema, the best part of this film is that most importantly, it believes in itself. At not a single point in this movie did I ever stop and think that visual authenticity was important to this film, because it's not. Hey, in some instances the visuals behind this movie aren't exactly great, but you know what supersedes that? The suspension of disbelief. I believe in this movie because from start to finish, much like with Cloverfield, what we are witnessing is the documentation of events from a human perspective. You see, it may seem obvious, but the giants in the movie are far more giant if you see them through the eyes of the terrified creature trying to survive on the ground. Hint, that's us humans. I don't know guys, I could ramble on about this movie for days, but as far as giant monster movies go, Troll Hunter is one of the finest examples ever made. Written and directed by Andre Øvredal, the man responsible for the autopsy of Jane Doe, which is also awesome, Troll Hunter tells the tale of a group of students from Volda University College who set out to make a documentary about a suspected bear poacher out in the Norwegian wilderness. Well, they soon find the bear poacher, but as they also soon find out, it's certainly not bears that he's after, but a far bigger and far more terrifying kind of creature. Honestly guys, Troll Hunter is awesome. It really is. If you haven't yet seen it, please give it a watch. You won't be disappointed.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Bubba Hotep from Bubba Hotep. An official selection of the Toronto Film Festival some 2 decades ago, this wild horror comedy thrilled audiences left and right. Unfortunately, festival success and critical acclaim don't often add up to financial explosions. Plus, the movie is probably too weird to casually explain to anybody who wouldn't want to watch it, so that sort of plays against it. But believe me when I say it, you want to watch Bubba Hotep. Involved are some of the folks responsible for Phantasm and Army of Darkness. You've also got Bruce Campbell, goddammit. And you've also got a whimsical reimagining of a couple of American legends that most people wouldn't think to craft a horror movie about. To set the stage, I've got to introduce the non-monsters in the movie. You've got Bruce Campbell playing an aging, delusional Elvis impersonator. 20 years ago, he fell off the stage, broke his hip, and fell into the fantasy of being the king of rock and roll. Then you've got Ozzie Davis as a nursing home resident who's convinced that he is John F. Kennedy post-assassination. The two discover an ancient Egyptian curse that seems to be plaguing their nursing home and decide to put a stop to this. The curse summons Bubba Hotep, a mummy who was stolen from a museum, lost in a storm, and dressed up in cowboy attire. Instead of bringing the mummy's curse to a research team that might know how to stop it, or maybe a college campus where young folks might have a chance at fighting it, this mummy decides to wreak havoc in the community of senior citizens. Now that's a scary villain, hedging its bets and claiming souls who are already at the end of the road. The goofy premise of a lost mummy tearing through a nursing home in a 10-gallon hat plays well with the comedic chops of Bruce Campbell, but still manages to pull off some good scares. Plus, for 2002, The Mummy looks pretty good. It's no Brendan Fraser big budget affair, but it works for what the movie's trying to do. If any of what I said appeals to you in the slightest, you've got to check out this underappreciated early 2000s gem. Just don't watch the trailer, it does not do the movie justice. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Animatronics from Willy's Wonderland. What can I even say about this weird, wacky Wonderland? A knockoff Five Nights at Freddy's starring Nicolas Cage as a badass drifter who doesn't speak, blood, guts, pizza, and arcade games. 8 insane, broken down, and decrepit animatronics out for blood. Is it good? Is it bad? Does it matter? It's exactly the kind of movie one would expect from Nick Cage at this point in his career, but even then it comes across as totally batshit crazy. And you know what? It's actually pretty cool. Each animatronic has a fun and unique design, harkening back to the glory days of Chuck E. Cheese and other similar family fun businesses. There really is something inherently upsetting about early animatronic characters. Kids knew it when they saw the Country Bear Jamboree growing up. Adults knew it when they returned to Charles Entertainment Cheese's entertainment complex years later. And of course, Scott Cawthon knew it when he created one of the most iconic and well-known horror franchises of the past decade. So when a movie with a budget that isn't $0 decides to lean into that uncanny valley horror show, you know it's gonna be a ride. This is a pretty new one, so if you want to avoid Willy's Wonderland spoilers, I'd move right along to the next entry. So the story here is that a legendary serial killer and his cannibalistic cohort ran this pizza emporium years ago. Every once in a while, they would kill off a hapless family and figure out how to hide the evidence. When they did eventually get caught, they performed a satanic ritual to transfer their souls into the animatronics where they still reside today. Even after the facility shut down, they'd managed to lurk out under cover of darkness to kill people in the nearby town. So some folks from the town decided to strike a deal with the robotic maniacs. If they trick random drifters into being night janitors every once in a while as sacrifices, the animatronics will stay put. But as you know, Nick Cage and any of the characters he plays will never go down without a fight. It's a messy showdown, and it is suitably ridiculous.
Next up at number 3, King Kong vs. Godzilla, 1962. I'll be damned if this isn't one of the finest moments in kaiju cinema of all time. Really, to be a fan of this type of cinema, you have to adhere to a certain set of disbelief. When there's a guy in a lizard suit rolling around a fake background, yeah, sometimes it doesn't always work. And whilst that is certainly the case in 1962 King Kong vs. Godzilla, holy moly, if there aren't some absolutely astounding moments of cinema to be found here. It's crazy because what's so great about this genre is that Toho Studios just didn't care. Not in the sense that they didn't put their heart and soul into these movies, because that's exactly what they did. They just didn't do things by a certain playbook. Hollywood be damned as far as they were concerned, because they wanted to put one guy in a lizard suit and one guy in a gorilla outfit and then make the best damn movie that they could. This is the culmination of that very spirit, King Kong vs. Godzilla, and whilst next year there is a remake coming our way, if you've got a spare 90 minutes, just give this movie a watch. Really, this is one of the finest examples of kaiju cinema going, and it's certainly worth your attention. Again, directed by Ishiro Honda and written by Shinichi Sekizawa, the story behind King Kong vs. Godzilla originally began with the giant Lord of the Apes actually throwing down with some version of a giant Frankenstein monster, which, let's not beat about the bush, would have been absolutely awesome, but thankfully for us, Toho snapped out of it and realised that the giant lizard king would be a far greater adversary. Obviously, the narrative behind this movie is pretty self-explanatory, but the cultural impact that this movie has had on science fiction cinema is kind of staggering. There are so many urban myths and legends about this movie that it's worth experiencing that just for the fact, and whilst most of them aren't exactly true, the ending to King Kong vs. Godzilla is one of the most epic conclusions of 20th century cinema. This movie is brilliant, and its historical significance should not be forgotten. Coming in at number 2, Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, 1995. Finally, we have a place to put this movie. And yeah, whatever. This movie isn't scary in the slightest, but my word, if this movie isn't all kinds of marvelous, then I don't know what is. The thing is, we get it. We love Godzilla, we love King Kong, they're the greatest, but until this movie, Gamera was one of the most overlooked kaiju monsters of all time. Put it this way, Guardian of the Universe was both a reboot of the franchise and also the 9th movie featuring the turtle-shelled monster hero. Gamera is persistent, and the payoff, surprisingly, was one of the greatest kaiju movies of all time. Gamera is a kaiju like no other. He's a massive massive, fire-breathing prehistoric turtle, and much like his Godzilla brethren, he was mutated via exposure to nuclear weapons. At the start of the kaiju franchise, Gamera was an all-consuming aggressive force, but slowly, as the franchise evolved, Gamera took a backseat to his other more famous kaiju co-stars, and eventually was forced into a niche, to say the least. You see, eventually Gamera took on a less malevolent force, and instead, he became a defender of humanity, particularly human children, and a guardian of our planet against extraterrestrial alien forces. All of this finally culminated in his reinvention of a reinvention in 1995's Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, and this movie is astounding because of it. Written by Kazunori Ito and directed by Shusuke Kaneko, again, Gamera, Guardian of the Universe embodies that same spirit that Toho Studios have perfected over the decades. This movie is just freaking fun. It's so fantastically bizarre that you can't help but be entertained. Gyos flying through the skies, attacking people left, right and center, and the giant fire-breathing turtle, who is a friend to all human children, saving the day. In many ways, this entry embodies everything that we love about kaiju cinema, and as a side note, the following Gamera-centric movies are also worth a watch. Again, if you're looking for some 90 minutes of entertainment, you really cannot go wrong with Gamera. And finally, coming in at number one spot, Gojira, 1954. It just has to be, doesn't it? And whilst over here at Top 5 Scary Videos, we do indeed favour doing things a little differently when it comes to picking our particular movie entries, we don't need that here. You see, kaiju monster movies already speak for themselves in that regard, or well, roar for themselves, I guess. And 1954's Gojira, the most important giant monster movie that has ever emerged from Japan, exemplifies that fact entirely. This is the definitive Godzilla movie, and still to this day, over 60 years later, 1954's Gojira is unrivaled. It is astounding how well this movie is held up, and much like some of the suit work seen in King Kong vs. Godzilla, some of the scenes that were captured in this movie were hallmark moments in science fiction cinema. Following its release, Ishiro Honda, the man behind 1954's Gojira and one of Toho Studios' most legendary kaiju contributions, said, "If Godzilla had been a dinosaur or some other animal, he would have been killed with just one cannonball. But if he were equal to an atomic bomb, we wouldn't know what to do. So I took the characteristics of an atomic bomb and then applied them to Godzilla." You see, this is exactly why kaiju monster movies captured something so special. They exemplified an era, a period of Japanese history that was still trying to recover from the horrors of the Second World War. In fact, the destruction seen throughout this black and white B-movie, metaphorically speaking, still can rival some of the most expensive and well-produced giant monster movies ever made. 1954's Gojira is a masterclass in how to make a giant monster truly terrifying. Low angles, ample pacing on the reveal, high-angled shots of the ant-like human survivors fleeing in terror. Gojira is sci-fi horror 101. Whilst this genre isn't exactly for everyone, the influence it has had on the horror genre is undeniable. This movie cemented Godzilla as the definitive, unrivaled giant monster, and since its release way back when in 1954, few films have come close to toppling it. Kicking off at number 5, Them, 1954.
Mountain lions never come down into the desert.
No cat ever lived leave a print like that.
Maybe something was set down there.
Alright guys, a lot of you folks called for some classic black and white style monster movies, and yet I held off including the more iconic of them, given the fact that, yeah, no matter how much you like to argue against it, they're still pretty damn dated. However, one of those movies may well be impervious to the sands of time, and of course it would feature an equally impervious creature as its titular monstrosity. Them, a movie about giant radioactive ants, released way back when in 1954. And yet, despite its initial premise promising some unabashed cheese of the 50s variety, surprisingly this movie holds up phenomenally well. Particularly in its opening scene, which from a horror perspective was actually way ahead of its time. The sad truth is though, from our high and mighty tower of 2019, when we look back at black and white cinema, they have to work extra hard for them to stand the test of time. Granted, movies like Psycho, 1933's King Kong and the original Godzilla are iconic in their own right, but still, the truth remains the same. To be good, you gotta be the best. Directed by Gordon Douglas with a story from George Worthing Yates, Them tells a tale of two New Mexico police officers, Sergeant Ben Peterson, played by James Whitmore, who in his later life would go on to play Brooks from The Shawshank Redemption, alongside Trooper Ed Blackburn, as they discover a young girl distraught, wandering the desert in a strange, almost catatonic state. They take her to a nearby trailer settled by her family who were vacationing there, only to find that he's been mysteriously and savagely attacked by a strange, almost impossibly large creature. Well, what ensues is a classic cat cat-and-mouse pursuit of two intrigued police officers following in the wake of this destruction, and whilst anything else would be spoilers, when this movie gets going, it actually really gets going because, well, giant radioactive ants. That's why. That's all I'm saying. Despite that though, for a movie that during its time would have relied on being a quick cash grab, instead, them actually takes its time in portraying an incredibly compelling narrative. For storyline and performance alone, this movie is worth a watch, and yes, whilst the effects may be dated, the bones of this movie are giant monster cinema 101. Swinging in at number 4, Prophecy, 1979. And if you thought Annihilation was cool for featuring some mutated ursine, think again, because 1979's Prophecy was doing it before it was even cool. And that's the point of this movie actually, because still 1979's Prophecy gets so trashed by critics that it's hard to see the mutated leaves for the trees. You see, as a creature feature, Prophecy is like playing a feral druid in an RPG. There's more metamorphoses than you can shake a branch at, but as a giant monster movie, this movie relies on a hodgepodge of all of those creatures into one giant pile of vile, mutagenic flesh. Sounds gross? Well yeah, that's because it is, and Prophecy loses quite a bit of its sheen down to the fact that the practical effects aren't exactly the greatest in this movie, especially when you understand the choices that this movie made in watering them down, but still, there's something quite charming about Prophecy that makes it worth its salt, and most importantly, like all worthy monster movies, this one has a message. Written by David Seltzer and directed by John Frankenheimer, the brilliant yet troubled director responsible for 1962's Birdman of Alcatraz, amongst many others, Prophecy was the first flagship title of the so-called Hollywood North, a business move in the late 70s intended to give a facelift for cinema in Canada. And what better way to do that than to create a story about a giant, vengeful forest spirit hell-bent on destroying a paper mill in the woodland of North America. I mean, yeah, it is set in Maine, but still, you get the picture. It tells the tale of Dr. Robert Verne, an environmental scientist who was commissioned to undertake a report about 3 lumberjacks that had mysteriously disappeared. Obviously, his pregnant wife accompanies him, because of course that's a sensible thing to do, and suddenly Dr. Verne witnesses something incredibly wrong with this forest. Giant salmon, vicious raccoons, tadpoles the size of bullfrogs, because why not? This movie essentially takes the ending scene of Jumanji and injects it with some highly mutagenic substances and then just lets everything go to hell. Don't piss off Mother Nature, guys. That's all I'm saying. No, but seriously, save the planet.
Number 3. Yamauba. Yamauba is colloquially known as the Defiler and is more properly known as the god of depravity and perversion, which is just about the worst way you can introduce yourself on a first date. Yamauba isn't just into human perversions, oh no. This wretched great one has its sights set on something much bigger than anything our little human brains could conjure up. Yamauba is after depravity on an incomprehensible scale. That's a word that gets thrown around a lot in the Lovecraft mythos, incomprehensible. Yamauba's true form is unknown, as it seems to exist in a state outside of a physical body. But when it's looking to pursue some of its disgusting pleasures, it always acquires a human host. And when it takes a human host, it warps its body into a wretched, grotesquely obese form, lacking a head or a neck, and featuring a mouth in the palm of both hands. And I cannot imagine that it is getting up to anything good with those palms. Yamauba is unlike most other great ones in that it's capable of directly speaking to humans in plain old English instead of indecipherable guttural noises. Its ability to speak English and communicate is what helps it to pursue its dark goals, as it seeks out humans who read perverse and forbidden literature, and it doesn't just hunt 50 Shades of Grey fans. It plants seeds of interest in human minds to research and eventually manipulating curious enough humans to read from the Revelation of Glocki, a cursed book containing Yamauba's name. When read, it will be summoned. When Yamauba is summoned, it makes its guests an offer, offering to make the summoner into a priest of Yamauba, welcoming them into its service. It's best to accept this gracious offer, as a rejection will offend Yamauba deeply, leading to the summoner to become its next meal. Unfortunate for you, but either way, Yamauba is very pleased with the outcome. Either it gets a new servant for its life, or it gets a nice little midday snack. Number 2. Nyarlathotep. Now, Nyarlathotep is one of the most sinister entities in all of the Lovecraft pantheon, and one of the most popular beings as well, appearing across several stories in the universe, both by Lovecraft and other authors over the years. Nyarlathotep first appears in the short story, Nyarlathotep, which is also another great jumping on point for new Lovecraft fans who want to get into the lore somewhere and don't know where to start. It's pretty self-contained. Nyarlathotep is unique in the pantheon for several reasons, but first and foremost is its freedom. Nyarlathotep isn't trapped under the sea or in the stars like Cthulhu or Azathoth, but rather enjoys the freedom of the earth as it wanders. It usually likes taking the form of a man, wandering as a tall, joyous, friendly man. All the better for it to influence people with. It's said that Nyarlathotep has thousands upon thousands of forms and manifestations, and we can probably safely assume that most of them are horrifying and sanity-destroying. Nyarlathotep could actually be described as the most human-like of any of the Elder Gods, which makes it all the more threatening. It's able to sway humans easily, gathering cults of personality around it. The original short story in which it appears, Nyarlathotep is gaining influence over the populations by wandering the world, performing incredible miracles, claiming to have lived for 27 centuries, winning over the hearts and minds of legions of followers willing to devote themselves completely for Nyarlathotep's will. Now, Nyarlathotep seems to take a sickening pleasure in driving humans to madness. For Nyarlathotep, death isn't the end game, but manipulating and twisting humans, driving them to insanity, that's the thrill. I guess it gets pretty boring being an unending, unstoppable power beyond the stars. You gotta find something to keep the day exciting, right? Merely being around Nyarlathotep is enough to make a man sick. Nyarlathotep isn't the absolute most powerful entity in the mythos, but it is definitely one of the most nefarious and threatening. Number 1, Yog-Sothoth. Oh, it doesn't even feel good saying that coming out of the throat. I shouldn't be talking about stuff like this. This is above my pay grade. Yog-Sothoth is a horrifying, unfathomably powerful god, and one of the most powerful gods in the whole mythos. If there's one big takeaway from H.P. Lovecraft's mythos, it's that there's always bigger fish up the food chain. We are so insignificant compared to everything else in the cosmos, but we think ourselves so important. We, the beastly fools of mankind, are dwarfed by the radiant greatness of Cthulhu, but Cthulhu himself is dwarfed by creatures like Yog-Sothoth. Yog-Sothoth, or Yagi as his close friends like to call him, is the embodiment of all time and space across the multiverse. Yog-Sothoth, like most gods in the Lovecraft pantheon, is an indescribable horror beyond human comprehension, and like Nyarlathotep, is known to be able to manifest and take several avatars to better serve its needs. But its most common form is described as that of being a massive, fractally glowing green orbs that continuously merge, separate, and regrow in an unending, spiraling sea of tentacles, tendrils, and eyes. Yog-Sothoth sees all. As the manifestation of time and space across the multiverse, there is nothing that can escape its gaze. It's wise to the entirety of all knowledge. It tempts humans by offering to impart that knowledge to those foolish enough to try and take advantage of that offer, who'll then have their lives utterly destroyed by madness after seeking its favor. The mere sight of Yog-Sothoth in its natural form is enough to destroy the human brain irreparably. Now, Yog-Sothoth's goals are just utterly beyond our understanding. It can't even be truly said that Yog-Sothoth is evil in the manner we understand. Our ideas of morality and good and evil just wouldn't register to a being like this. We're just too small to even begin to comprehend the horrors of the multiverse. And it's best we don't, because the more you try to study something like this, the more your obsession grows, and the more you seal your own fate.
Kicking off at number 5, Dark Was the Night, 2014.
Probably just some kids playing a prank, huh?
Yeah, why would they come out this far?
Never seen nothing like it. All the animals just vanished.
Alright guys, let's be honest, it's pretty difficult to be completely terrified by any sort of monster movie given enough scale, because the bigger they are, the easier they are to completely phase out any kind of tangible fear. Take note on that, because in this list we'll be scaling our expectations down a little bit, but it may also leave you scratching your head and asking the question, what's the difference between a giant monster movie and a creature feature? I don't get it, Jack. And the answer is, not a lot really, and also, I don't really get it either, but primarily it relies on a trope that coincidentally movies like Godzilla pioneered, and that is the fear of the unknown, but not in the cosmic horror sense, but in not knowing exactly what we're dealing with until it's too late. Let me introduce you to this movie, Dark Was the Night, a straight to DVD B movie that surprisingly is absolutely brilliant, and more importantly, it's pretty bloody scary, and it packs one of the most well written endings to any kind of monster based horror, I think. And you know what? It also stars Kevin Durand in the leading role, the guy who plays Kimi in Lost, Harbard in Vikings, and loads of other mid-caliber roles through movies and television. And in this instance, it's an absolute pleasure to see him take the lead, because he certainly can carry a movie if given the chance. Written by Tyler Heisel and directed by Jack Keller, Dark Was the Night tells the tale of the small isolated town of Maiden Woods, where Sheriff Paul Shields, played by Durand, is investigating a series of bizarre disappearances alongside his new deputy, Donnie Saunders, played by Lucas Cacus has, who is also pretty damn good in this film. Obviously, as you may imagine, the disappearances have something to do with an ancient evil that lingers in the woods, and that's all I'll say because the writing behind this movie is pretty remarkable, and for a B movie it's even more impressive. The creature design is fantastic, the pacing is spot on, and the finale to this movie will leave you pretty astounded in some way or another. More importantly, it's just downright entertaining, and whilst these monsters aren't exactly King Kong, they're full to the teeth with horror. Swinging in at number 4, The Monster, 2016.
I know what you think, okay? I know what you think. What is it? What?
And again, another movie that came out in the past decade that seemingly flew beneath the radar and still is pretty damn brilliant. The thing is though, whilst this movie certainly does exactly what it says on the tin, as in, well, the name of this movie is pretty damn clear, it's also important to note that this movie certainly isn't for everyone. If I said to you that it's an A24 movie, then that may clear things up a little, but also if you're in the mood for a subversion of the genre that also deals with some pretty damn terrifying psychological implications regardless, then yeah, this is certainly the movie for you. Also, giant man-eating monsters abound, and all that jazz. Written and directed by Brian Bertino, the man responsible for 2008's The Strangers. If I had to draw a genre comparison for this movie, I'd say that 2016's The Monster is to monster movies as 2012's The Battery is to zombie movies. Yeah, it takes a little bit more to enjoy than the typical sit back and witness the destruction, but that does not mean it's not worthwhile. It tells the tale of Kathy, played by Zoe Kazan, who is pretty remarkable here, and her 10-year-old daughter Lizzie, played by Ella Ballantyne, who are driving to her father's house as it's his turn to share Lizzie's custody. The thing is, from the off, we're overloaded with some pretty stark information. Lizzie, a 10-year-old girl, is sick and tired of taking care of her abusive, alcoholic mother Kathy, and she makes it pretty damn clear that she intends to live with her father permanently. While as the trip stretches on and darkness descends, the pair hit a wolf in their car, killing it. However, on closer inspection, it seems that the wolf was already on its last legs, as it had been attacked by something far bigger and far more ferocious. And yeah, as you may imagine, the rest is spoilers, but really, 2016's The Monster is such a refreshing departure from the norm that it's a must-see in my books. But it also paints itself with the same vivid tropes of the monster genre, as we catch glimpses of a far more terrifying creature in the periphery.
Coming in at 3, Titans. Hailing from Greek mythology, the Titans were the pre-Olympian gods. According to the Theogony of Hesiod, they were the 12 children of the primordial parents Uranus and his mother Gaia, with 6 male Titans, Oceanus, Cous, Creus, Hyperion, Lapetus, and Cronus, and 6 female Titans called the Titanites. Cronus mated with his sister Rhea, and together they became the first generation of Olympians. Zeus and his 5 siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Descendants of the Titans are also called Titans. The Titans were also former gods, the generation of gods preceding the Olympians. They were ultimately overthrown as part of the Greek succession myth, which told how Cronus seized power from his father Uranus and ruled the cosmos with the Titans as his subordinates. Now Cronus and the Titans were in turn defeated and replaced as the ruling pantheon of gods by Zeus and the Olympians in a 10-year referred to as the Titanomachy. As a result of the war, Cronus and the vanquished Titans were banished from the upper world, being held imprisoned under guard in Tartarus, although according to history some of these Titans were allowed to remain free. Coming in at 2, Fatchin. Hailing from Scottish folklore, the Fatchan or Fatchin is a monster or giant described by John Francis Campbell in popular tales of the West Highlands, as having a single eye in the middle of its face, a single hand protruding from its chest instead of arms, and a single leg emerging from its central axis. Not only that, but it has a single tuft of hair on the top of its head, which Campbell says, I quote, "It were easier to take a mountain from the root than to bend that tuft." Quite the tuft indeed. However, Campbell isn't the only writer to reference the giant. Douglas Hyde did so too in his collection of Irish folklore called Beside the Fires. I quote, "He held a very thick iron flay club in his skinny hand and 20 chains out of it, and 50 apples on each chain of them, and a great venomous spell on each great apple of them, and a girdle of the skins of deer and roebuck around the thing that was his body, and one eye in the forehead of his black-faced countenance, and one bare, hard, very hairy hand coming out of his chest. chest and one veiny, thick-soled leg supporting him, and a close, firm, dark blue mantle of twisted, hard, thick feathers protecting his body. And surely he was more like unto devil than to man. Now, though hailing from different countries, both descriptions seem to represent branches of a common Gaelic tradition. Finally, coming in at number 1, Cacus. Hailing from Roman mythology, Cacus, meaning bad, was a fire-breathing giant and the son of Vulcan. He was ultimately killed by Hercules after terrorizing the Aventine Hill before the founding of Rome. However, let's go back. Cacus lived in a cave in Italy on the future site of Rome. To survive, he feasted on the flesh of humans and would nail the heads of victims to the doors of his cave. Now, like I said, he would later be defeated by Hercules, and according to Evander, Hercules stopped to pasture the cattle he had stolen from Geryon near Cacus's lair. As Hercules slept, the giant took a liking to the cattle and stole 8 of them, 4 bulls and 4 cows, dragging them by their tails so as to leave a trail in the wrong direction. When Hercules awoke, the remaining cattle made suggestive noises towards the cave, so Hercules, now angry, stormed towards the cave, and a terrified Cacus blocked the entrance with a vast, immovable boulder, so Hercules quite literally tore off the top of the mountain to reach him. Cacus responded with spewing fire and smoke, while Hercules attacked with tree branches and rocks the size of millstones. Hercules eventually leapt into the cave, aiming for the area where the smoke was heaviest, and grabbed Cacus, strangling the monster to death. According to Virgil in Book 8 of the Aeneid, Hercules grasped Cacus so tightly that his eyes popped out and there was no blood left in his throat. Yikes.